If it hadn't been for Bernie Madoff, the most famous white-collar criminal in America right now would probably be Marc Dreier. If that name's not ringing a bell, it's because Dreier's $400 million Ponzi scheme was blown off the front pages by Madoff's arrest just a few days later. But the case is no less fascinating. The highly respected attorney who ran a big Park Avenue law firm was initially arrested in Toronto for impersonating an officer in a pension fund, in what's been described as perhaps the most bizarre arrest in the history of white-collar crime. But unlike Bernie Madoff, Marc Dreier agreed to talk to Vanity Fair magazine and to 60 Minutes in his only television interview.
I thought if somebody would ever interview me in a program such as yours, it would be for something good I've done, not something humiliating I've done.
This isn't the way you wanted to be on 60 Minutes.
No.
Nor was this the way that Marc Dreier wanted to make his final appearance in federal court as a defendant in his own fraud case. When we first interviewed him last spring, he was a prisoner in his own penthouse with a GPS monitoring device on his ankle, detained by private jailers whose $70,000 a month fee was being paid for by Dreier's 88-year-old mother. With his assets frozen or confiscated by the court, all that remained of Dreier's $40 million art collection were the hooks on the wall.
How did you end up becoming a crook?
I can't remember the moment in which I decided to do something that I knew was wrong. I had an ambition that I needed to feed. I think I fell into the trap of wanting to be more successful than I was.
But you were successful.
I was, but I really wanted to distinguish myself. I wanted to, wanted to be as important as I thought I deserved to be.
With degrees from Yale and Harvard Law and the ego of a successful trial lawyer, Dreier told friends he was going to become a billionaire. He started his own law firm that he said would revolutionize the business of law. He was going to hire the best attorneys, pay them top dollar, and keep all the profits for himself as the firm's only partner.
The idea for the law firm was very viable, but it needed much more money to get it off the ground than I anticipated, much more. So that wasn't very well thought out. I had a good idea, but a very bad business plan.
And the plan was about to get much worse. With his law firm a money pit and Dreier tapped out, he began approaching hedge funds with a cockamamie scheme he thought might save his dream.
Dreier told the hedge funds that he was representing a billionaire real estate developer who was looking to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to embark on some new projects. The developer, Dreier said, would issue short-term promissory notes guaranteeing interest rates of between 7 and 12%, well above market rates. And it seemed like a very good deal.
The only problem was that the real estate mogul who was supposed to be borrowing all this money, Sheldon Solo, didn't know anything about it. Nor did he know that Dreier, his former lawyer, was fabricating financial information about his company and keeping the loan proceeds for himself.
So you convinced hedge funds to lend money ostensibly to Mr. Solo, your former client, and in fact the money was going to you.
Yes.
So you came up with phony financial statements, phony audits, forged documents for Mr. Solo's company?
Yes.
How'd you do all that? How'd you get that stuff?
Well, I invented it.
You invented it. I mean, stationery?
Yes.
From the audit firms? How did you get that?
I was able to obtain their letterhead from either from correspondence that I had received for them or perhaps from the internet, I don't recall.
What was your biggest deal?
$100 million.
Somebody just gave you $100 million and never bothered to check with your supposed alleged client to make sure that this was on the up and up?
Right. But I don't know, I guess I heard a long time ago, too, that the more money you look for, the fewer questions people ask sometimes.
The obvious flaw in Dreier's scheme was that he would eventually have to pay off all the promissory notes plus interest if he wanted to stay out of jail. And in the end, the only way he could do it was by selling more notes to new investors.
So you were digging yourself into a hole?
Very much so. You start with something that you think is manageable and small. You know it's wrong, but you think you can fix it, and you can't get out of it. It became quicksand. I had to keep meeting obligations that grew bigger and bigger. Clearly, all along the way, if there was a way for me to have gotten out of it, I would have done it.
Dreier says he used most of the $400 million he stole to expand his law firm and to finance a lifestyle designed to create the illusion that he already was a billionaire. There was the $11 million Ocean Front compound in the Hamptons, an art collection that included a Picasso, 3 Matisses, and 12 Warhols. And then there was the 120-foot yacht Seascape with a full-time crew of 10, all mortgaged to the hilt.
How much did you pay for the yacht?
$18 million.
And for this apartment?
$10.5 million.
You enjoyed the good life?
I did. It was clear to me that the more you showed people you didn't need money, the easier it was to attract money. So having the trappings of success was a very important part of the plan.
To raise his profile, Dreier co-hosted annual charity events with former New York Giants star Michael Strahan that attracted top-name performers like Diana Ross, John Bon Jovi, and Alicia Keys. And then there were the extravagant office parties where Dreier himself sometimes performed.
In this town, you have to really be something. You know, you don't succeed quietly in this town, perhaps. And I think I succumbed to that.
By 2007, Dreier LLP occupied 10 floors of a Park Avenue building, employed more than 250 lawyers around the country, with high-profile clients like Bill Cosby, Andy Pettit, Maria Sharapova, and Justin Timberlake. What no one but Marc Dreier knew was that the rents, the salaries, and the expenses were all being subsidized by fraud.
I recognized in the last couple of years that what I saw as a $20 million mistake had grown into a mistake of a few $100 million. And then I did some increasingly irrational things because I wasn't thinking clearly.
Crazy things.
Yeah.
Desperate.
Yeah.
Last fall, as the financial crisis set in, Dreier was holding hundreds of millions of dollars in loans that were about to come due, and everyone wanted their money back. When Dreier was a month late on a $100 million loan payment, the hedge fund that was owed the money demanded a face-to-face meeting with executives at Sheldon Solo's real estate operations here at his office building in New York. With reality closing in, Dreier enlisted the services of a former client, Kosta Kovachev, to impersonate the president of Solo's operation. Then he commandeered a conference room in Solo's office for a meeting with a hedge fund in hopes of getting a loan extension. And you conduct this whole charade right there in the middle of Solo's business?
Yeah.
Did you think you were going to get away with that?
Yeah.
You did, actually, didn't you?
Yeah.
Were you nervous?
I should have been nervous, but I don't know. I wasn't very nervous.
I don't get the sense that you're a very emotional person.
I think I am. I didn't plan anything I was going to say in this interview other than not to lose my emotions. But it's not going to do me any good to literally cry over it.
When I ask you about the emotion, I mean, here you are, walking into a former client's office, perpetuating this scheme right in his office.
That's called chutzpah. That's not emotion, you know. I mean, do I have chutzpah? Yes. Can I be very tough under pressure? Yes. So was I able to go into Mr. Solo's office and pull off that charade without falling apart? Yes. Did I think I could do that? Yes, because I had done things that required nerves of steel before. But it doesn't mean that I'm not emotional about what I did. I clearly remember when I left that office thinking I had done something really crazy and foolish.
It was bizarre. I mean, he was impervious to the idea of being caught.
Attorney Gerald Shargell, who would represent Dreier during his legal proceedings and plea negotiations with the U.S. government, said the facts of the case were beyond the reach of a soundbite.
He was a solid lawyer, and there are a number of judges who told me that Marc Dreier was probably the best lawyer that has ever appeared in front of him. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, it's like something went off the tracks.
Do you have any idea what it was?
You know, he was fighting his own demons. In his own mind, he hadn't achieved what he was expected to achieve. And he wanted to just grab for it, but he grabbed for it in a profoundly sick way.
By December of last year, both investors and investigators had grown suspicious of Dreier, and his luck would eventually run out in Toronto, where he pretended to be a lawyer for a teacher's pension fund in order to swindle a hedge fund out of $33 million.
That was the first act I'd done where I knew I was going to get caught and just couldn't help myself. I just wasn't thinking clearly.
Dreier had collected a business card from the lawyer he was claiming to be, but the man he was supposed to meet with sensed that there was something wrong.
What made him suspicious, do you think?
You know, he had acted diligently, and he made some phone calls which I think led him to be suspicious. I knew as soon as he walked in that he was suspicious, but I still did it.
The police in Toronto were called, and Dreier was arrested for impersonation. When he returned to New York 5 days later, he was apprehended by the FBI on charges of fraud and money laundering, to the complete and utter astonishment of the New York legal community and to the employees of his own law firm.
When we heard the news, we thought it was a joke at first.
There were 10 floors of attorneys and boxes, but a lot of people started to resign immediately. They just walked out the door.
Okay, next up. These are the black Poltrona Frau leather bucket-style chairs.
10 days after Dreier's arrest, the law firm bearing his name had declared bankruptcy, and 600 people were looking for work. The day we met attorney Joanne Rapuano and longtime office manager Tori Lalonde, the firm's furniture and office equipment were being sold off by the court to pay off the creditors, mostly hedge funds and their investors, who were not likely to see much of the missing $400 million.
Okay, now we have the paper shredder. If this paper shredder could talk. How much of the paper shredder? $25 bid, open it up now.
What's it like being here?
Truly tragic. You know, you watch something get built, you think you're part of something on its way up, then all of a sudden you see it being carted out the front door.
1,000 opens it up. $1,000 bid to open it up.
It's just disgraceful. We are victims. I have no job. I have no medical. After today, I'm done. So now what do? Start my career all over?
I don't want to compare you with Madoff, but one of the questions that people ask about Madoff constantly is how could he do this? How could he walk around living this life, spending all this money, never showing a crack in the facade? And there's some similarities, but how did you deal with that?
I was doing a lot of things at the same time. I was engaged in a fraud which took a lot of energy to sustain, but I was also running a law firm, a legitimate law firm, other than obviously the obvious fact that it was funded illegitimately. I was a practicing lawyer. I was handling my own cases in court, which took a lot of energy. I almost didn't have enough time to dwell on the elephant in the room, which was the very, the crime I was engaging with to keep all this up.
He has plenty of time to dwell on it now. After entering his guilty plea, Marc Dreier has begun serving his 20-year prison sentence in Illinois. He wanted everyone he hurt to know that he was profoundly sorry. And for someone so obsessed with his own image and what people thought about him, his punishment is just beginning.
I've lost everything I own. I've lost my business. I've obviously lost my reputation. I've caused my family, obviously, enormous unhappiness. And I have nothing.
Do you have any friends?
Now? Doesn't seem so.
Of all the problems facing the United States right now, none are more important than health care. President Obama says rising costs are driving huge federal budget deficits that imperil our future, and that there is enough waste and fraud in the system to pay for health care reform if it was eliminated. At the center of both issues is Medicare, the government insurance program that provides health care to 46 million elderly and disabled Americans. But it also provides a rich and steady income stream for criminals who are constantly finding new ways to steal a sizable chunk of the $500 billion that are paid out each year in Medicare benefits. In fact, Medicare fraud, estimated now to total about $60 billion a year, has become one of, if not the most profitable crimes in America. We caution you that this story may raise your blood pressure, along with some troubling questions about our government's ability to manage a medical bureaucracy. If you want to find Medicare fraud, the first place you should look is South Florida, where we were told it has pushed aside cocaine as the major criminal enterprise here. It's a quiet crime, no sirens or gunfire. The only victims are the American taxpayers, and they don't even know they're being ripped off. FBI Special Agent Brian Waterman, who we rode with for several days, told us the only visible evidence of the crimes are the thousands of tiny clinics and pharmacies that dot the low-rent strip malls. You don't even know they're there because there's never anyone inside. No doctors, no nurses, and no patients.
This office number should be manned and answered 24 hours a day.
This tiny medical supply company billed Medicare almost $2 million in July and $500,000 while we were there in August. But we never found anybody in, and our phone calls were never returned.
Say they're currently on the other line.
Oh. Well, do they want you to hold?
Sometimes they don't even have offices. We went looking for a pharmacy at 7511 Northwest 73rd Street that billed Medicare $300,000 in charges. It turned out to be in the middle of a public warehouse storage area.
They've already told us that there's no offices here, there are no businesses here. In fact, they're not even allowed to have a business here.
Waterman is the senior agent in the Miami office in charge of Medicare fraud. And Kirk Ogrowski, a top Justice Department prosecutor, oversees half a dozen Medicare fraud strike forces that have been set up across the country. This one operates out of a warehouse at a secret location in South Florida and includes investigators from the FBI, Health and Human Services, and the IRS.
There's a healthcare fraud industry where people do nothing but recruit patients, get patient lists, find doctors, look on the internet, find different scams. There are entire groups and entire organizations of people that are dedicated to nothing but committing fraud, finding a better way to steal from Medicare.
Is the Medicare fraud business bigger than the drug business in Miami now?
I think it's way bigger.
What changed?
The criminals changed.
Sophistication.
They figured out that rather than stealing $100,000 or $200,000, they can steal $100 million. We've seen cases in the last 6-8 months that involve a couple of guys that, if they weren't stealing from Medicare, might be stealing your car.
You know, we were the king of the drugs in the 80s, we're king of healthcare fraud in the 90s and the 2000s.
Man, what did they tell you?
But it's not just Miami. In March, the FBI arrested 53 people in Detroit, including a number of doctors, and charged them with billing Medicare more than $50 million for unnecessary medical procedures. And in Los Angeles, the City of Angels Medical Center recruited homeless people off the street to fill their empty beds, offering them cash and drugs plus clean sheets and 3 squares a day while billing Medicare tens of millions of dollars for their stay.
We have to understand this is a major fraud area.
United States Attorney General Eric Holder has taken a crime that's been in the backwaters of law enforcement and made it a top priority at the Justice Department.
Why do you think it's been so attractive for the criminals?
Because I think it's been pretty easy. I think that they have found a way in which they've been able to get pretty substantial amounts of money with not a huge amount of effort, and at least until now, without the possibility of great detection.
With much fewer risks.
Much fewer risks. You'll see some of these people and they'll say, you know, there's not a chance that you're going to have some other drug dealer shooting at you. The chances of being incarcerated were lower. The amount of time that you would spend in jail was smaller, all of which is different now.
You're waking up every day making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 every day, almost literally. And you're like, wow, I mean, I just won the lottery.
Let's call this guy Tony. That's not his real name and obviously not his real face. But before he was ratted out by a friend and brought down by the FBI, he was making Wall Street money running a string of phony medical supply companies out of this building. They were theoretically providing wheelchairs and other expensive equipment to Medicare patients.
How much money did you steal from Medicare?
About $20 million.
20 million?
Yes.
Was it easy?
Real easy.
And you're not exactly a criminal mastermind.
No, not really. It's more like common sense. That's all you need here.
Did you actually ever sell any medical equipment?
No. No. Just have somebody in an office answering the phone like if we're open for business, and wake up in the morning, check your bank account, and see how much money you made today.
You didn't have any medical equipment. You didn't really have any clients either, did you?
No.
All of it was fake?
All of it was fake, yes.
And you would just fill out some invoices and some forms and send them to Medicare?
And that's it. And 15 to 30 days, you'll have a direct deposit in your bank account. I mean, it was ridiculous. It's more like taking candy from a baby.
According to the FBI, all you have to do to get into this business is rent a cheap storefront office, find or create a front man to get an occupational license, bribe a doctor or forge a prescription pad, and obtain the names and ID numbers of legitimate Medicare patients you can bill the phony charges to.
There's a whole industry of people out there that do nothing but provide patients.
When you say provide patients, what do you mean?
I'm just talking about lists of patients, people's names, social security numbers, addresses, and date of birth. With those 4 things, You can bill for a patient.
In order for Medicare to pay, you need to have a Medicare patient. Where do you get those?
There'll be people that sell you a list of maybe $10 per patient, and I'll buy 1,000, 10,000 maybe at a time. And then you just fill in that patient's name, and you send it. And then I use the same patients with the same company. Then the next company, I use the same patients and keep using them. And they'll pay for the same patient every time.
Once the crooked companies get hold of the patient lists, usually stolen from doctors' offices or hospitals, they begin running up all sorts of outlandish charges and submit them to Medicare for payment, knowing full well that the agency is required by law to pay the claims within 15 to 30 days, and that it only has enough auditors to check a tiny fraction of the charges to see if they're legitimate. If they're not, it's usually people like 76-year-old Clara Mahoney who catch them. She began to notice all sorts of crazy things turning up on her quarterly Medicare statements back in 2003, things that Medicare paid for on her behalf and that she never ordered, never wanted, and never received.
What kind of things?
Oh, air mattresses, a wheelchair, urine bag for my leg. Was getting so I didn't want to open up the explanation of benefits because you know, is like, oh no, not again.
Mahoney, who says she hasn't been sick in 30 years, began calling Medicare to tell them that someone was ripping them off. But the only responses she received were letters saying that someone was looking into it. The bogus charges are still turning up on her statements.
And I continued to report, and I kept saying, can't you flag my account? You know, I'm not getting any equipment or supplies, nothing.
So how many years have they been looking at it?
6 years.
Once criminals like Tony get their hands on usable patient numbers, they try and charge Medicare for the most expensive equipment possible, which requires having access to a list of Medicare codes.
And what were some of the best codes?
Artificial limbs, electric arms, electric wheelchairs. I mean, a regular patient, you can put them 2 artificial legs and an artificial arm, and they'll pay for it.
And that's what happened to former federal judge Ed Davis. He was one of those patients who started getting charges on his Medicare statement for artificial limbs.
I looked at it, and it had charges for a prosthesis, and I knew I had my arms.
Did you get the left arm and the right arm on the same bill?
Both arms, same bill, yeah.
And you obviously have 2 good arms.
The same ones I've had for over 70 years.
Didn't anybody at Medicare check to see if any of these charges were valid?
Sometimes they'll do, but by the time they did it, it was too late.
Too late?
Yeah, we already made 300, 400, 500,000 on it. And then we will never send them nothing back. And then in 30 days, they'll send an inspector to your office, and by that time,
it's all closed down.
It's all closed down.
So they would pay first and audit later?
Yes.
There's something I don't understand. I mean, you're saying essentially people just fill out the phony paperwork. They send a bill to Medicare, and they pay it.
That's why you have companies that can run for 60 and 90 days and bill for ridiculous things, because there are very few checks and balances to even determine whether these things, A, were medically necessary, B, were ever given, or C, even physically possible for a patient with the kind of conditions they have.
The FBI calls it pay and chase, and riding around with them, we saw plenty of examples. This tiny pharmacy in a Hialeah strip mall went from billing Medicare $13,000 in May to billing nearly $1 million a month later.
This place billed $800,000 in the month of June?
Correct.
It's a pretty small place.
By the time we were there in August, the FBI says the owners had already burned the company, shut it down, and moved on to another operation.
We were here last week. It was, there was stuff on the shelves. The business still had a name on it. You can still see from where the tape is that someone just took this off.
To understand just how preposterous all of this is, the FBI says that this tiny little store collected 6 times more money from Medicare in June than the largest Walgreens pharmacy in the state of Florida. Quite an achievement, since neither the FBI nor the proprietor of the bingo parlor next door ever saw a customer coming or going.
What's the deal with the pharmacy?
I've never seen people only twice.
No customers?
No customers. It's always been locked.
We obviously had a few questions to ask of the people at Medicare and requested an interview with the person in charge of preventing fraud. That turned out to be Kim Brandt, Medicare's Director of Program Integrity.
We went around with an FBI agent and a woman from Health and Human Services. They took us to storefront after storefront after storefront, billing $300,000 or $400,000 a month, and they were completely empty, nobody there. I mean, how did they get away with that?
We're as frustrated by that as the law enforcement officials that you went out with. And in fact, our primary focus over the past 2 years has been to tighten our enrollment standards to make it so it's much harder for people like that to be able to get in the program and to be able to commit that kind of fraud.
Look, I'm sure that you're aware of these problems, but it doesn't seem like you're doing a very good job. I don't mean you personally, but I mean the government. This is still like a huge problem and getting worse, right?
Well, it really does come down to the size and scope of the Medicare program and the resources that are dedicated to oversight and anti-fraud work. One of our biggest challenges has been that we have a program that pays out over 1 billion claims a year, over $430 billion, and our oversight budget has been extremely limited.
About that, there is little dispute. Medicare has just 3 field inspectors in all of South Florida to check up on thousands of questionable medical equipment companies.
Clearly more auditing needs to be done, and it needs to be done in real time.
Why is it taking Medicare so long to figure out they were being scammed?
I think lack of resources probably. And then I think people, I don't think necessarily thought that something as well-intentioned as Medicare and Medicaid would necessarily attract fraudsters. But I think we have to understand that it certainly has.
The Obama administration is providing Medicare with an additional $200 million to fight fraud as part of its stimulus package, and billions of dollars to computerize medical records and upgrade networks should help Medicare catch more phony charges. But Tony, who has just begun serving his 12-year prison sentence, says there's no shortage of people in Miami waiting to take his place.
How many people in Miami were doing this?
I say at least 2,000 people. At least 2,000, 3,000 companies.
Well, presumably some of them are going to be legitimate.
I say less than 5%.
Less than 5%?
Yes.
If I went to the phone books and looked under medical equipment suppliers, 95% of the companies would be phony?
Yes, sir.
There's no greater desperation than to be told that you or your child has a disease for which there is no hope. Many people with incurable illness look forward to the promise of stem cells. Stem cells have the potential to turn into any kind of cell, and in theory, they could repair damaged cells, though scientists tell us that we're years away from realizing that dream. There's no stem cell miracle today, so con men have moved in to offer the hope that science cannot. Just look online and you will find hundreds of credible-looking websites offering stem cell cures in overseas clinics. 2 years ago, we began investigating stem cell charlatans. We worked with patients suffering from incurable diseases, and we discovered con men posing as doctors, conducting dangerous medical experiments. You know, Mr. Stowe, the trouble is that you're a con man. Our report started a federal investigation. Since that story, we've been digging into the rapidly growing trade in fake stem cell cures, and we found something even more alarming: illegal stem cell transplants that are dangerous and delivered to your doorstep. They're scams that often bilk the desperate out of their last dollar of savings and their last ounce of hope.
I know you're tired.
Adam and Brandon Susser are 11-year-old twins. Adam has cerebral palsy. His brain was damaged by a lack of oxygen before he and his brother were born.
He's confined to a wheelchair. He needs assistance with all his daily living activities, from cleanliness to feeding to clothing.
Gary and Judy Susser have searched for anything that might improve on the judgment handed down by Adam's doctors.
The sentence of being a quadriplegic, the sentence of being totally blind, the pronouncement by physicians that we should put him away.
Those were the things that his regular doctors were telling you?
Correct. We were being advised, literally, to put him away. He's going to destroy your life.
So, back in 2003, the Sussers took a chance on the theory of stem cells. Adam was 3. They brought him to a doctor in Mexico who injected stem cells with no idea whether they would work.
We both decided that in the severity of his condition that we'd have to try it.
Apparently, there was no harm and no miracle.
The progress that he made after that was minimal at best, and therefore we didn't see any good coming out of it.
Today, people like the Sussers can find hundreds of sophisticated websites offering stem cell treatments for every hopeless disease.
I see how people are preyed upon by hucksters and charlatans. And people who have a special child don't need any more expense, don't need any more heartache, and don't need any more false promises. They need the truth and they need hope. Attaboy.
To help us learn the truth about the illicit stem cell industry, the Sussers agreed to work with us in an investigation of one stem cell laboratory. We focused on StemTech Labs of Ecuador because it offers cures for cerebral palsy and a long list of 70 incurable diseases. The website claims a modern-day medical miracle and says, "We are FDA registered," apparent approval from the Food and Drug Administration. The founder and director of StemTech Labs is an Alabama doctor named Dan Eklund. We've been tracking Dr. Eklund for months.
Hello, is Dan Eklund there, please?
In October, we asked the Sussers to contact Dr. Eklund. Eklund sent them a letter which offered the blind and paralyzed Adam the possibility of an improved level of consciousness, improved ability to see, to speak, to stand, and walk. What can stem cells really do today? We asked a scientist who's doing some of the world's most advanced studies in stem cells, Dr. Joanne Kurtzberg.
I believe stem cells have a lot of promise, but we are way at the infancy because real stem cells are very difficult to control as therapy. I personally think we're 10 years away from seeing real cell therapies that are working and are safe, but I do believe it will come.
Dr. Kurtzberg is a physician and the chief scientific officer of a stem cell research program at Duke University. She advises the federal government and is the co-director of this multi-million-dollar laboratory which works with stem cells harvested from umbilical cord blood. Dr. Kurtzberg told us there is no evidence yet that stem cells can treat cerebral palsy.
Some of the diseases that we see stem cell cures offered for on the internet include multiple sclerosis.
There are no stem cell cures yet for multiple sclerosis.
Lou Gehrig's disease?
I wish there were, but there are not.
You know, I wonder how often it happens that you have to tell a patient, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." And then they come back to you 2 days later and say, "Well, I see all these cures on the internet."
I get many of those calls and emails and see many of those patients, but it's very dishonest to mislead people when there's nothing you can do.
But there's a lot that can be done for Adam Susser, at least according to Dr. Eklund, who spoke to the Sussers from his lab in Ecuador.
Say hello to Dr. Dan. Adam. Can you see him, Doc?
Dr. Eklund's only examination of Adam came by teleconference. Eklund didn't know we were watching.
You think it would help him, you know, make him improve?
I think it's likely to help him, yes. I would say 75% chance that he would have a noticeable improvement.
Eklund proposed 4 treatments costing a total of $20,000. The Sussers asked Eklund to treat Adam near their Florida home.
Again, my concern would be the legalities of it.
He's right to be concerned it would be a felony to use stem cells in an unapproved therapy or to sell them for export to the U.S. That's why we were surprised to see this on many websites, a shopping cart. We clicked on Eklund's StemTech Labs cart, and with no medical or scientific credentials, we bought 20 million umbilical cord stem cells for $5,000, shipped to America. We had the cells sent by the highest medical standard. Duke University suggested we use something called a dry shipper, cooled with liquid nitrogen. We sent the dry shipper to StemTech. StemTech sent the frozen cells to us, and we forwarded them to Joanne Kurtzberg. A computer chip inside our package verified that the cells were properly frozen all the way. Dr. Kurtzberg analyzed the cells. For comparison, look under the microscope. Healthy umbilical cord stem cells look like this. The cells we got from StemTech had disintegrated.
So these are the cells you purchased, and they are dying or dead.
We see all of these dead and disintegrating cells, and essentially cellular debris. Are there dangers of injecting that into someone?
There are huge dangers if you injected that into someone's blood or spinal fluid, because all these little fragments and debris would get trapped somewhere in the bloodstream and could cause a stroke, or in the brain could cause an inflammatory reaction.
This could actually do harm.
Yes, this could do a great deal of harm.
Remember, the Sussers asked Dr. Eklund to treat Adam in the U.S., and last month, he got out of a van to meet Gary Susser at a Florida hotel where Eklund planned to do the transplant. We dug into Dr. Eklund's background and we found things that he hadn't told the Sussers. This is the document in which the state of Alabama revoked his medical license in 2005. The State Medical Commission said Dr. Eklund admitted that he prescribed controlled substances to a patient with whom he was having sex, prescribed controlled substances to a patient who he knew was a drug addict, and had sexual experiences with young female children. We also tracked down his laboratory in Ecuador, not exactly the state-of-the-art facility claimed in his website. The hotel room Gary Susser and Dan Eklund headed for was set up with a number of cameras that were tucked out of sight. Susser excused himself. Eklund was expecting to meet Judy and Adam, the blind and paralyzed 11-year-old, in whom he intended to transplant stem cells, cells from his lab that sold us the dangerous biomedical junk. Instead, we came in.
Dr. Eklund, I'm Scott Pelley with 60 Minutes.
Oh, great.
How are you today?
I am surprised.
We've been working with the Sussers on a story, and I want you to know that we're being recorded. And I wanted to ask you about the treatment that you propose for Adam. What would that be?
The treatment that he asked about was for stem cells, human stem cells.
And you think they're applicable for cerebral palsy?
Yes, I have seen them be effective in cases of cerebral palsy.
How does that work exactly?
Well, stem cells contain excuse me here. No one knows exactly, okay? But some stem cells do contain and give off chemicals which cause other cells to repair themselves.
In the letter that you sent the Sussers, you described possible effects for Adam, which could include improved ability to see, improved ability to speak, improved ability to move arms and legs. You believe those things are possible?
I do.
What is your training in stem cells?
My training in stem cells was I studied for about 6 years going over the literature. And then I started producing stem cells in my lab.
You're self-educated, self-taught.
Mm-hmm.
Have you published any research?
No.
Frankly, Dr. Eklund, you have nothing to base your results on. There's no clinical trial, there's no blind study, there are no medical papers published.
That doesn't make any difference.
You know, you say it doesn't make any difference that you haven't done these studies. I would imagine...
The studies have been done in other countries.
I would imagine it would make a big difference to the Sussers.
The studies have been done in other countries. These are not published in the United States because they cannot be published in the United States.
Where is this seen in the medical literature anywhere in the world? If you did the things that you describe in this paper, you would win the Nobel Prize.
No, if I did the things that are described in that paper, it would not be published. It would be suppressed, and you wouldn't hear about it.
Eklund told us breakthroughs with stem cells aren't published in scientific journals because of a conspiracy of drug companies and governments that he had trouble defining. That's when we told him we bought cells from his lab.
When your cells are delivered, they're functioning, living stem cells.
Yes.
We purchased some stem cells from StemTech Labs 6 months or so ago and had them delivered to Duke University, which did tests on the stem cells, and they determined that the stem cells were dead.
Well, they must not have handled them appropriately then.
You're thinking that you handled them appropriately, but the stem cell laboratories at Duke University did not.
That would be my assumption, yeah.
I don't think that there's any chance they were damaged in shipment.
We asked Dr. Kurtzberg to listen to Eklund's theories.
Yes, I have seen them be effective in cases of cerebral palsy.
This is pretty scary, actually, that he would be saying these things, that he would be leading them on this way, because what he's talking about is very dangerous.
Is this a con, Dr. Eklund?
No, it's not a con. I have taken the stem cells myself. Would I take the stem cells if I thought that they were a con? No.
Putting them in an 11-year-old boy is an entirely a different matter.
That's why I took care to explain the remotest possible difficulties, which have never been reported.
Without any medical studies that have been published in major journals that have suggested that stem cells have any efficacy.
You keep going back to this point, that they are not published in major medical journals. I'm telling you.
It is the standard of the world. I do keep going to that point.
I'm telling you that they are not going to be published in this country, because when someone does try to do it, then they have 60 Minutes come and visit them. And I think that's enough for me. Thank you.
We don't know where Dan Eklund went, but we do know the whereabouts of the two con men who were the subjects of our first stem cell story 2 years ago. In that investigation, we worked with patients Stephen Waters and Michael Martin, who suffered with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. They were promised miracles from Lawrence Stowe and Frank Morales, who offered a $125,000 stem cell therapy.
What, keep me out of a wheelchair?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Our story launched a federal investigation, and last week, Morales and Stowe were indicted. The indictment alleges they made $1.5 million with stem cell fraud. If convicted, they could face 20 years in prison. The patients who helped us, Stephen Waters and Michael Martin, lost their lives to ALS last spring. We will continue our reporting on the stem cell fraud tomorrow on our brand new morning broadcast, CBS This Morning.
The ancient wisdom that there's a sucker born every minute has been especially pertinent given the financial disasters of the past few years. So it's time for a short and painless test. Are you sometimes just too trusting? Do you invest in things you don't really understand? Are you also a bit greedy? Then you too could be suffering from pigeon fever. Pigeons, just so you know, are what con men call their victims. After a year of revelations about Bernard Madoff, who cheated investors out of billions, you might think Americans have wised up. Fat chance. Prosecutors and regulators tell us that even in this age of skepticism, Ponzi schemes like Madoff's are thriving. One regulator even calls it ponzimonium. Why are there so many pigeons around? We asked a few people who should know. As a student of con games and deception, were you at all surprised by the Bernie Madoff scam?
Would you be surprised if I told you that I predicted it?
For starters, we approached Ricky Jay, America's foremost card sharp. actor, sleight-of-hand artist, a man with an encyclopedic knowledge of con men past and present. He told us of a talk he gave 7 years before Madoff's fall.
Beware of someone well established in the industry.
A lecture on financial fraud to a gathering of police officers in 2001.
I would also beware of someone who will rely heavily on an affiliation with an investor group, be it religious, ethnic, or geographic.
He was describing Madoff to a T.
I think these elements will make the market ripe for any sort of pyramid or Ponzi scam, Ricky Jack.
And that is pure Bernard Madoff.
It's pure Bernie Madoff. But can I tell you another element of the con? That I actually made this page on Photoshop last night and put it into this bulletin. And I did that to prove a point. And the point is...
You got me.
Good. You set it up by saying that I was a student of cons and that I'm knowledgeable in that area, and so you allowed my supposed expertise to make you believe this is true. This magazine is true. I really have lectured to this group of police against confidence crime. Everything is true except for this page, which I slipped in last night.
So what's the moral? Trust no one.
We wouldn't want to live in a world where we couldn't be conned, because in effect we would then be living in a world where we mistrusted or refused to trust anyone. So this is the price we pay.
And pay we have. In the wake of the Madoff scandal, Ponzi perp walks have become a marathon. Texas financier Alan Stanford, accused of a $7 billion Ponzi scheme. Minnesota businessman Tom Petters, convicted recently of a $3 billion scam. And Park Avenue lawyer Marc Dreier, mastermind of a mere $400 million Ponzi scheme that landed him first on 60 Minutes and then in federal prison.
I thought if somebody would ever interview me in a program such as yours, it would be for something good I've done, not something humiliating I've done.
Despite the downfall of the Dreiers and the Madoffs, Ponzi operators large and small are busier than ever, knowing we're all capable of greed, misplaced trust, and something else.
I think it's anxiety. It's anxiety that you're losing out, that other people are doing better than you are.
Stephen Greenspan is a University of Colorado professor who writes and lectures on gullibility, warning audiences that not reading the fine print or buying something on a tip from your brother-in-law are bad ideas, and that older people are particularly vulnerable to a friendly pitch from a con man. In most of the great moments of gullibility in history, the perpetrator seems to target a particular group, correct?
Yes. There have been Mormon Ponzi schemes targeting Mormons or fundamentalist Christians. Madoff mostly was aimed at Jews because he was a prominent Jewish philanthropist. So yes, there is this affiliation aspect of it because we tend to trust our own kind.
Here in 1919 is Charles Ponzi, self-styled financial wizard, loafing at his Boston mansion with his lovely wife and proud and adoring mother.
Mr. Ponzi himself promised fellow Italian immigrants he could make them rich trading in postal reply coupons, sort of the prepaid phone cards of the day. Ponzi went to prison and died a pauper.
I went out looking for trouble. I found it.
But his name lives on for the fraud he made famous.
The basic concept is robbing Peter to pay Paul. You have a fund of new money coming in, and you use the new money to pay the old investors, but at a certain point that has to stop.
Gullibility is at the very core of this, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, history is filled with examples.
Mr. J's library is replete with documents about cons, scams, and hoaxes of all kinds. Amazing animals.
And the cynocephalus was often featured on circus lots, and eventually people realized that the cynocephalus was a baboon wearing lederhosen.
Celebrated con men, including Count Victor Lustig.
This is an original wanted poster of the Count. One of the things he did in France was that he was able to sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal, and he was able to do it twice, which is sort of wonderful.
Mr. J reports that over the years, people really have tried to sell the Brooklyn Bridge, as well as Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square in London. And in another cautionary tale, still unfolding, pigeons were both the investors and the investment. Arlen Galbraith, who called himself the Pigeon King, convinced hundreds of American and Canadian farmers there was good money to be made raising the birds for food.
And everybody we talked to said this guy was on the up and up. Nobody had a bad word to say about him anywhere that we could find.
So Aaron and Jolene Humbert, Ohio farmers, signed up.
I've had such tremendous demand for the live birds.
The Pigeon King assured investors that pigeons would replace chickens in every pot in America and the world. He'd sell you breeding stock and buy back the offspring. Soon, barns across the Midwest and Canada were filled to the rafters with birds and high hopes.
He was building his herd, building the flock.
He had to have so many hundreds of thousands of birds a week to supply his production.
But to some, including the Attorney General of Iowa, it sounded like a Ponzi scheme. Iowa and 3 other states barred the Pigeon King from doing business. And shortly after the Humberts bought in, Pigeon King International declared bankruptcy. The Humberts lost $300,000, most of it borrowed money.
We've contacted everybody in the states we could think of. And, you know, from elected officials to FBI to our local prosecutor. And everybody says, yeah, obviously there's something wrong here. It was a scam, but to prove it is going to be very difficult.
Galbraith declined our request for an interview. Canadian police now say he was running a Ponzi scheme. Do you blame yourselves at all?
To a point. We just didn't find the red flags popping up, so we tried it, and then we lost.
Might as well went to Vegas and put it all on red.
We would have had a lot more fun.
At least in Vegas, you know the odds always favor the house. Elsewhere, even the most sophisticated among us can be had. For instance, our gullibility expert Stephen Greenspan, who, after writing a book on the subject, discovered he'd lost $400,000 of his retirement money to who else? Bernie Madoff. Was it embarrassing for you?
2 days after I had the first book copy in my hand, I found that out. Well, it was painful, obviously.
And the fact was, Greenspan had never even heard of Madoff. The hedge fund managing his retirement money had simply reinvested the $400,000 with Madoff.
I don't even think I read the prospectus. I trusted the people I was turning my money over to, and I've always done that, and it's usually worked well, except in this one case.
What did your wife say to you when you confessed that you'd lost part of your nest egg?
I told you so, because I had tried to talk her into it. And she said, I don't think so.
What made her suspicious?
Maybe it was the word hedge fund.
Which brings us to Wall Street and the financial meltdown of 2008. Poking through the wreckage, many experts believe the root cause was a perfect storm, a monsoon of gullibility colliding with a tidal wave of greed.
This was a massive Ponzi scheme, and it's the biggest crime against the American economy in our lifetimes. In fact, ever.
Janet Tavakoli is an analyst specializing in derivatives, the exotic financial instruments at the heart of the meltdown. She argues that the bad mortgage loans that fueled the crisis were repackaged by investment banks, sliced into increasingly complex derivatives, and resold to other investors, even though the underlying mortgages were often virtually worthless.
You had various traders buying each other's products to artificially keep the prices up so that the bubble didn't collapse.
Not only that, but the mortgage derivatives being traded were so mind-numbingly complicated, nobody understood them fully. Certainly not the pigeons, the buyers at banks, mutual funds, pension funds, and insurance companies who wound up holding a bag full of worthless paper. These guys are smart guys. They're all graduates of the finest business schools in the country, correct?
Yes. If they were gullible, they're sophisticated investors. So they can't really go back to the investment banks that sold them this product and said, we've been had, because they held themselves out to be experts in these kinds of securities.
All of which proves that whether you're on Wall Street or Main Street, brain power is no defense against con men. In fact, smart guys may be the biggest suckers of all.
As someone who does sleight of hand for a living, to me the ideal audience would be scientists or Nobel Prize winners who are incredibly smart in their one area, and often, not always, have an ego with them which says, I am really smart, so I can't be fooled. No one is easier to fool. So Morley, I'm going to play you one hand of blackjack with certain propositions that make it too good to be true.
And so, determined not to be conned by him again, I sat down for a friendly card game with Mr. J.
You win all ties.
The rules were all stacked in my favor. I got 20, he showed a 9, meaning I thought it was impossible for him to win.
And God, the only thing that could beat you would be as if I had a 12 or something. Oh, which I do. You see, I have the 12 of clubs. So I have 21 to your 20.
But there's no such thing as a 12 of clubs, right? Wrong. Not only did Mr. J manipulate the cards somehow to get the ones he wanted, he was also dealing from a deck used in certain rummy games that includes 11s, 12s, and 13s. This pigeon had been had again.
And the other real element of the con is that I told you this was too good to be true. Anyone should stand clear of something that's too good to be true.
Because it never is.
It never is.